Big welcome to tonight's free webinar with Dr. Lou Cozolino. Lou, you're very welcome.
Good to be here.
Nice to see you again. And before I hand over to Lou, just a few practicalities. Usually we don't have any tech problems, but if there is any problems, what we suggest is that you log off and log back on using the link provided. And if the issues persist, we'd recommend that you contact Mary. Mary's email is mary@pcpsi.ie. And just to say that the format of tonight is that Lou will speak for approximately 30 or 40 minutes. There'll be an opportunity then to do Q&A. And there's two ways you can send in your question. We'd, as always, love people to come on live. So if you want to do that, you need to press the yellow hand function, which is under reactions, and I see your name. And when I call out your name, we need you to put on your mic and put on your camera. But if you don't want to come on live, you're more than welcome to use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. And just to say that Robert and Mary, who refused to let their cameras on, Lou, they said no way. They're here as well. So a big thank you to Mary and to Robert as always. So Lou, I'm excited. Maybe to start, if you just tell us a bit about yourself, where you are in the world and what you do.
Sure. I'm sitting here in my room at home in Los Angeles, and I've been a psychotherapist and a teacher for 36 years officially, but probably for many years before that as a graduate student. I was in school a long time. I didn't want to graduate because I didn't like working, and I loved school. So I ended up doing 2 master's degrees and a doctoral degree, and stretching them out as long as I could. But at a certain point, the loans come due, and I had to go to work. I was thinking about it the other day that it looks like my estimate is that I've taught about 45,000 students. I'm sorry, no, 4,500 students over the years. Sorry about that. But I've spent about 35,000 hours sitting across from a client doing therapy. So I don't know what any of that means, except that I've been around a long time. And if you get up every morning and go to work, eventually the numbers pile up. Okay. What do? I write books. Besides that, I've written books on a lot of books about neuroscience, healthy aging, education, things like that. And so for the last 25 years or so, I've been really studying the sciences, neuroscience, biology, evolution. And my question has been, what are the underlying mechanisms of psychotherapy? In other words, everyone has a different way of doing therapy, but when therapy works, my question was, well, what's actually happening in the brain, in the mind? What are those levers and buttons? And that interest came from the fact that when I was in graduate school, and I had degrees in theology and philosophy as well, what I found was that it was kind of cultish, and maybe some of you experienced this. You go through a program and you go from teacher to teacher, and they're all, in a sense, trying to indoctrinate you or bring you into their tribe. And that could be the CBT tribe or the psychoanalysis tribe, or in philosophy, it was, are you a follower of Descartes or Aristotle or Sartre? In theology, of course, obviously, there's this sort of, every possible sect spins off and all of that. So I liked the tribalism. It was interesting. I always wanted to be a member of a tribe, but I found that whenever I would try to join a tribe, I would see that, yes, they have really good points. Whatever form of therapy they're doing works well with certain people at certain times, but it always seemed like every particular perspective was missing something significant. And so I think that really is one of the reasons why, I went to science with the hope of something that was a little bit more objective and some way I could get beneath the tribalism and sort of the cults of personality around Freud and, Beck and, all of these people, to see if there was something, fundamental. And so I guess that's what I've been looking at. And one of my motivations for wanting to, to work with you, Liam, and with PCPSI is to get back to some of those basics. Because what's been happening, what I've seen is I've been supervising students from pretty much all over the world now. And over the last 5 years, the scope of my supervision has expanded. I'm seeing therapists, people from it's still in school or beginners to people that have been practicing for 10, 20 years and still having trouble trying to figure out how to conceptualize a case, how to use some of the basic the basic principles of doing psychotherapy. And so I'm really motivated to to work with you on this. And this collaboration is sort of born of that desire to help some of the students and of course our their clients as well. So it's a real pivot for me. I haven't done this. This is my first lecture or first attempt to talk about it this openly and this obviously. So please bear with me and as I kind of figure out the best ways to communicate these things. Okay. Did you have another question, Liam, before I go on, or?
No, just to say that it's a real pleasure for us to have you, Lou, and I just don't say that lightly. And I think one of the things that I was really kind of attracted to in your work was the way that you're proposing to teach the webinar series in February.
Mm-hmm.
Because I love the creativity of it, and I love the interaction of it, and I love that it's very different to anything that we've ever done before. So maybe if it feels okay, could you say a bit about that, of how you plan to set it up?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been back in 1986, in the fall of 1986, when I started teaching at the university. I developed a class that was sort of my version of a class that I took when I was in a master's program that was developed by Carl Rogers and his students. And I had the opportunity to work with Carl and another one of his students, Bill Rogers, no relation, but they were my professors, my counseling and therapy professors. And their model was a combination of lectures, didactic lectures, but also experiential interactions that were interwoven and really helped me to understand and really internalize the types of things I was learning. And so over the past, 35, 36 years, I've been teaching this course called Psychotherapy and Counseling. And I've always thought that I would love to take this course, if possible, and do it on a webinar, to do it for a larger group of people. Well, until COVID, I didn't really have an idea of how to do it. But once COVID hit, it forced me to figure out how to do it because I couldn't go to the classroom.
Sure.
So over the last couple of years, I've been tinkering with it. And so what the class involves certainly are lectures about ideas. And also what the class involves, I think even more importantly, is I bring a few people in to an inner group. In other words, there however many people are in the class, it could be however many, but to bring in perhaps 6 people or 8 people in a session and do a brief session, 10 or 15 minutes, say, with one of the people in the group, and then go around the group and talk about what's happened, the different ways I intervened, the ways perhaps I should have intervened. If you've got 8 people in a room doing therapy, you've got 8 different opinions about what should be happening, right? And
Absolutely.
and kind of what I don't really believe there's a right way to do therapy. I think it's partly for me, there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of learning involved in it, but also there's a bit of performance art, intuition, instinct. And so what I try to do is just demonstrate those things. And if other people want to take a crack at it and do it, and then we go around the room and I have people sort of talk about as they were listening, where did their thoughts go? what triggered them. So we look at examples of transference and countertransference, for example. I'll say, imagine being the client. How would that feel for you? What was your reaction to me? And then I'll have them imagine being the therapist. And usually students will talk about all the things that they wanted to say that I didn't say, or all the things that I said that they wish I hadn't said. So what it is, it's a dialogue about all those things. And in the process of that, I think what everyone learns is that there are many ways to do therapy, that you, like, multiple heads are certainly better than one, which is why supervision is so important. And, having colleagues to discuss cases with is so important. But also I think there's this inner exploration, right? Because students are sitting and thinking, and they have the ability not only to have their free associations of what's going on during the session, but also the opportunity to talk about it and to really just to see how perhaps their personal experiences or their biases or their psychology might have led the session in a direction that's very different from the direction that they watched, and maybe very different from a direction that it should go in, or would be better if it did go in. So I think it's that sort of combination of theory and the application of theory in this constant ongoing interaction that makes the difference. And I think it's what I hear from students and have heard for decades when they come back to school years after graduation. They say, that's the class that I remember. And it's those moments of interaction where I really felt vulnerable and present and open to feedback that have stuck with me all of these years. Does that kind of give an impression?
Absolutely. Super. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So that's kind of and that's what I'm trying to work on. I'm fortunate. I've had a couple of years now doing it online. Well, actually almost 3 years now, so that you won't be dealing with me just fumbling my way through it. I've got method down and all of that stuff is going on. Okay. Okay. So if I could, a couple of the things that I'd like to talk about is some of the experiences I've had with supervising students over the years, and especially recently, because I think a lot of things have changed. While I was busy studying sciences and not focusing on the study of supervision and treatment, just doing it, the world has changed. Schools have changed, education has changed. And so there have been things that have kind of, I don't know, they've been sort of emotionally, some of them have been upsetting, some of them have been revelatory. But what I'm impressed with really continually is the students that seek me out, from all over the world for supervision, and their motivation, their desire to continue learning, their wanting feedback. It's and we all need those things, and it's wonderful that that they're doing that. But one of the things I've really been surprised about, and I don't think this is the fault or the lack of attention on the part of the students. When I ask them about what they've been trained in and what they bring to the sessions, they really don't have a lot of tools in their toolbox. And when I say that, I don't mean techniques or checklists or all of those things you can find online and in workbooks. I'm really talking about the ability to stick with the fundamental principles and to rely on the fundamental principles, the basics of psychotherapy. And it's when I ask them about it, it really doesn't sound like they've been trained in those things adequately so that they can rely on them to have those as a foundation going forward. And I think one of the things that, and maybe this is particular to the group of people I work with, but I would imagine that it's pretty widespread, is that they often feel like they're bad therapists or imposters because what they're doing is they're going into sessions without a map, like they're flying by the seat of their pants. They're trying to be empathic and understanding, but that's a great ability to have. It's a great thing to do, but it's only a small piece. It's an important piece, but it's a small part of what you need to know as far as the sort of the diagnosis and the treatment, treatment planning and all of those things. And so that's really become more and more clear to me, and more of an impetus actually to do this work with PCPSI and develop, sort of fill in those blank spaces as much as possible. One of the things I've noticed is that, and again, I'm contrasting it to my training from 35, 40 years ago. So, and also I've been trained in the Boston, in Boston and in LA in the States. And so some of the things I'm saying may not be true for where you are. So I apologize for that, but I can only see the world from, through my own eyes here. One of the big changes I've noticed is that when I was in training, the fact that I was in therapy was very important. And the fact that when I was being supervised, what was going on for me in therapy and the things I was working on was part of what was discussed. And the supervisor had access to those things, so we could see how my own challenges and struggles and unresolved issues were being brought into the therapy, and how the supervisor then can help me with those things. What I've noticed at my university over the years is there's been less and less and less of an emphasis on that, to the point now where the only time students hear anything about the importance of their own therapy is a paragraph when we're interviewing them, where we recommend that they go to therapy, right? Good. But students, again, might be very Los Angeles centric, but most students are very hesitant to combine their own development as a human being and their own personhood as part of their training. And I think that is a real shortcoming and a real shame, because we really are the instruments of what we're doing. It's sort of like it's like a ballet dancer that wouldn't want to stand up, that just wants to sit and study ballet. When you're in a room with a client, you're really creating a new organism, this new dyad, where your unconscious, your internal world, has been a bigger part of what's coming out as your clients. There was a Robert Langs, who was a therapist, one of the influential folks when I was studying. He said that within a therapeutic relationship, there's always lots of mental problems and distress and unresolved issues. You hope that most of those things are coming from the client, but you never really know. Absolutely. And so, so an important part of the therapy, really, as being a therapist, is knowing what your issues are, being able to see them, and being able to work with those and putting what you're doing in that context. Does that make sense, Liam? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think it makes absolute sense, Lou. Like, there's a depth to us, and I know we've spoken a little bit on this, but like, my own kind of therapy process has been, ongoing for years now, and I still probably not go weekly now, but I go regularly. It's, for me, it's had to be like that. It's been very slow, because of my history. But I agree. Maybe in Ireland it's a bit different in the psychotherapy courses, in that there's an expectation that you do so many hours. So that's really good. But in an area that I'm interested in as well as addiction, but here we train addiction counselors, and it's getting a little bit better. But for the most part, for years and years, there wasn't any expectation to do counseling. And I started out in addiction. I did an addiction counseling course, and I always tell the story, and I'll keep it brief. But I remember someone said to the director of the course, "Shouldn't we be doing counseling?" And he said, no, there's no need for counseling. He said, if you run into any problems, just go to a supervisor. And I remember the first treatment facility that I worked in, there was a senior counselor in there who logically was very kind to me and related, very generously to me. but I was actually afraid of her.
Mhm.
And there was two particular mornings in the week where I could be facilitating a group with her. And when I'd leave my house, the anxiety levels would just stop inside me, and they wouldn't subside until I knew I wasn't going to be in the group with her. Or if I went into the group with her, the only way that basically I could cope was just shutting down.
Right.
But when there's not a culture in, say, what you're speaking about, or even a culture in, treatment facilities where, the therapist's own process is fundamental, then you're in big trouble. So absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear there's more of an emphasis on personal treatment. But it seems to me that, and of course I don't know, but it would seem to me that there's very little emphasis from supervisors on integrating that work into students' work with clients. And that's really where it pays off professionally, is being able to see the interface of those two things. So that's, something that I'm hoping to be able to do with who's ever interested and willing to engage in those discussions, as part of the seminars going forward. Basic therapeutic skills. I think one of the things that's changed over the years, and this might have to do more with the monetization of psychotherapy trainings, is that you have more and more it seems like every week there's a new therapy with a new set of letters. And what I see in my students is that they go from, training to training to training, with the hope that they're going to find they're going to have enough trainings to the point where they feel like they're not an imposter, like they know what they're doing. Now, I love trainings and I've gone to a lot of them, and I do a lot of them. But I think that the trainings about techniques and specific forms of therapy really come later, right? The initial parts of training have to do with the four basic perspectives as I see them, sort of, psychodynamic, systems therapy, cognitive behavioral and existential therapy, and kind of the biological aspects of mind and behavior and all of those things. And I think that if you have an understanding of those basic elements, all of which I think are relevant in every case, they may be different, they're different, have different importance, say, from case to case. But all of those elements, the psychological, the social, the cognitive, the emotional, the biological, these things are all relevant. And I think if you have a basic understanding of the mechanisms of the person, of mind and brain, and you've got those basics, then what you see is, each week as a new therapy emerges, what you can do is say, oh, okay, this is an offshoot of like EMDR. What's EMDR? Well, it's an offshoot of CBT with this technique involving the orienting response or eye movements or whatever. Okay, good. Well, there's this internal family systems, or, transpersonal side, whatever it is. You can look back at the basic formats of therapy and okay, this is a derivative. Someone had a way of packaging this. They could write a book, they could make some money, they could do some trainings, right? And they're limiting it down to this one perspective, which is fine if you've got a broad training, because you know where to put it, and in the sort of the context of your knowledge, and you can use bits and pieces from it. But what I see is maybe it's that the search for security. Nietzsche called it the will to a system. Everyone needs a system to believe in, so it's so they feel secure within the tribe or whatever. But what that does now, because of the prominence of all of these sub therapies and techniques, is people go from thing to thing, and I think it enhances a sense of being an imposter or a lack of confidence, because that there's something fundamental missing, and all of those sub therapies don't really fit together very well. Right. So I think we need, it's almost like a conceptual grid upon which to hang all of the things that have come out and the things that are going to continue to come out our entire career. It's not going to, having new therapies every week is not going to stop. Right. And I remember when back in the 90s, when I started studying neuroscience with a few other people, then this idea of neuropsychotherapy and neuropsychoanalysis came out, right? It's like, man, there isn't any neuropsychotherapy or neuropsychoanalysis. You can call it that, but there's no form of treatment for that, right? What that is usually psychodynamic therapy or cognitive therapy with an understanding of how the brain functions and having that alternative description, right? So I think that one of the things I hope to do in the training is to provide that basic grid work for students so they don't feel so sort of scattered and insecure, and they can put what they have learned so far in a larger framework of the basic forms of therapy. Related to that, I think one thing that I notice is often very difficult for students, and they haven't gotten a lot of training in, is developing a case conceptualization, right? So I'll ask a student, well, how are you conceptualizing this case? And, I'll get responses like, well, their childhood wasn't so great, so I'm just trying to be consistent and present and caring, right? That's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that, but it really isn't a case conceptualization because it doesn't have a theoretical model. It doesn't allow you to know where to look for help or, if you're getting stuck in a case and all of that. And so another thing I'd like to do is really help students form a basic case conceptualization and develop a theory about why their clients are going through what they're going through. And it can be from any perspective, right? It's just a matter of going through the discipline of organizing those thoughts and having that map. So when you get stuck or when things go off the rails, you have something to look at, right? And refer to. Okay.
I think that's a really kind of important point, because what I see is if I'm not clear or if somebody's not clear, I think what it creates in me is what you might call kind of an efforting process.
Mm-hmm.
So you're kind of striving or you're kind of goal or orientated to make something happen.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's probably more sympathetically dominant. So I think really takes us away from being present with our client. So I think I think the clearer we are, the better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's another key piece, I think, of the things that make us feel like an imposter, right? And of course, I would imagine every beginner feels like an imposter. And I've worked in industry and I've worked with newbies in a number of different fields, and everybody feels like they're kind of faking it. I'm going to fake it till I make it, till I figure it out. I work in the people who I work with that have addictions. They say, well, we got to act like, how do normal people act? I'm going to act that way until it starts to feel natural to me, right? So the imposter thing, if you feel like an imposter during your first 6 months of your training, that's completely acceptable. But I'm meeting people that feel that way 10, 15 years into their practice. And so I think that that's something that I want to focus on as well in the training. I'm hoping the training itself helps to help people feel less like an imposter. But what I see happening at least at my university is when students talk about their feeling like an imposter, the professors usually shrug it off. They say, oh, that's normal, you'll outgrow it, right? But they don't think about the fact that some therapists, maybe many therapists, never do. Okay, and so I think that this imposter thing, it's another thing I want to talk about or work on with my students. I mean, I think there are subjective sources of that and objective sources. In other words, we all carry shame, right, within us from our development, our childhood, whatever. Many of us develop we develop perfectionistic defenses against it, and perfection is sort of the shadow of shame. If you're trying to be perfect or you believe you can be perfect, it's because you feel like you should be, to try to escape the shame that you're feeling. And of course, there's depression and low self-esteem and all of those things. Those are therapeutic issues, but they're also important as part of supervision to know how an individual student is dealing with their cases. I think the flip side of that are objective sources, and here's where I think that the education makes it work. Okay, there are ways in which that's both consciously and unconsciously within training that support those negative fantasies. Okay, I think that we're always taught in school that we have to know things, that we have to do well on tests, that we have to accumulate information. But what most teachers don't help their students to realize is that ignorance is a really high state of consciousness, right? Because most of what, I mean, half of the thing, for just a small example, half of the things I learned about neuroscience when I was in graduate school are wrong now. So what good did the certainty about those things do me all these years, except to keep me from seeing things that might have been more correct? I might have been able to see them sooner, right? So I think that and it's natural in school because we're learning and we're gathering information, right? But I think that our teachers give us the impression that they know everything because they've been around a long time. We don't know anything, right? And so then it's just kind of the same thing in the training with MDs, right? They go to hospitals as residents and they have to make believe they know what they're doing, and they know they don't know what they're doing, right? And we know we don't know what we're doing at the beginning. We're faking it. We're trying to figure it out, okay? But I think it would be really helpful in training if people were taught to cherish their ignorance, right? And what I mean by that is that, certainty, usually if we're certain about something, we're generally wrong. The most important gift I think we have is our curiosity. And there are all sorts of training, and these kind of irk me a little bit. I get annoyed by these cultural sensitivity trainings because everybody I meet is a different person. I like every person is kind of an experiment of nature. And if you meet one person who's of a certain color or nationality or race or comes from a city or a town, you've only met one person, right? Absolutely. And so, right? Yeah. So I think that we're much better not knowing and having our clients teach us about who they are, right? And I've only had positive feedback from my clients about things like that. Like, well, okay, you're from the other side of the world in a city I've never been to. Of course, I've got some broad stereotypes about people from your land or from your country, but I'm going to throw those all away right now. Teach me about you. Teach me about who you are, right? Taking that down to a more specific level, I've worked with families where I'll meet brothers or sisters separately, and they both have completely different experience of their childhoods and their families, right? So what is it exactly we're certain about? What is it that we're learning in school that we can be so sure about that makes us feel so insecure if we don't remember a fact or if we come up with the wrong answer to a question, right? So I think an important part of training I think professors need to get off their high horse about all of their knowledge and their understanding and realize that, yeah, the knowledge might be important, but you never know when. You never know when you're going to be right or wrong about something. And so I would much rather nurture the curiosity and the humility of a student than say, okay, you've got to learn everything about someone's culture before you can sit with them, right? So just as an example.
And I think I really agree with you, Lou. And like it's this kind of, the word, a few of the words that came to me. One was this kind of beginner's mind. And I think when I was in college and when I did a lot of my training, I didn't kind of realize the kind of power of curiosity as a kind of an intervention.
Right.
That I think curiosity is a kind of it feels to me curiosity is a state. But if we can be connected to our curiosity, it's more powerful than a lot of the traditional interventions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think people naturally respond, or most people do anyway, respond to curiosity, right? when we try to be the expert, I think it's off-putting. It creates a distance. But if we're curious about other people, it tends to draw them out more. And I think probably biologically, it activates the brain in a way that produces higher level of thinking and integration and emotional presence. Right?
Absolutely. Because if you think about it, like growing up, how many people were actually curious about us or kind of interested in us or had an openness about us? So and even who you mentioned at the start, Carl Rogers, I think, you know, I think he talked a lot about curiosity.
Oh yeah, yeah. I remember him saying to a patient, "Is like, he wanted Carl to give him some answers for things, and you know, Carl said something to the effect of, I don't feel I could possibly know the answer for you of what you should do in your life, but I'm sure as heck able, you know, willing to be here with you and talk about these things and try to help, you know, find the answer together."
Yeah.
Beautiful response. Now, of course, with some clients, they need you to be the expert. So you might have to make believe you're the expert for a while, but that's again part of your case conceptualization, right? If you make the choice to be an expert with someone who's very dependent or perhaps has borderline, you know, personality organization or something like that, that's a strategic choice, right? But it shouldn't mean that you buy your own expertise.
Yeah. So it's kind of, as much as possible, we kind of decline the role of expert.
Yeah, well, I try to. Yeah, I try to, for sure. Yeah. I think, you know, connected to this, one of the things that people, and you mentioned it just a few seconds ago, we underestimate the value of silence, you know, and I think silence as an intervention, again, grounded in a conceptualization of what your client is able to deal with and what they can benefit from, is hugely important. To be able to give the time and the space for your client to think, to not feel like they have to be responding, and also for the therapist not to work so hard to be like a dancing bear, always coming up, because if you're always having to think about what you're going to say next, it's really hard to be in the present and listening to what your client is saying and fully absorb it.
Yeah.
So another thing I work with, like if I have, you know, if a client brings in or a student brings in a tape, for example, I really like to have them. And I tell you, having a student watch themselves on tape doing therapy is something that's incredibly impactful. Many students can't even handle it. They're overwhelmed by it because their fantasy about what they're doing is so disparate from what they see themselves doing. Right. So if you can't tolerate seeing yourself do therapy, that's important. And that's an issue that has to be addressed and sort of deconstructed and figured out. Okay. But tolerance of silence and learning how to use it is important. Another thing I think, if you have another thing connected to this, is if you have an interpretation to give to someone, or you think, I think one of the best ways to make your client defensive is to present it in a very certain, confident way, right? Because really what you're doing, if you're making an accurate interpretation about a behavior or way of thinking or feeling, what you're really doing potentially is taking away the value or the power of that defense. And so I love to think, I don't know if years ago there was a detective on television called Columbo. Yeah. I don't know if you guys, how many of you know that, or maybe the younger folks don't remember Columbo, but he was bumbling. His coat was buttoned askew. It was always had stains on it. He drove a car that hardly ever worked, right? And when he would investigate things, he would interview people as if he was very confused. Everything was hypothetical. He was always wondering about things. So I've really taken on the Columbo approach. I hardly ever present an interpretation saying, aha, I've got it, right? For me, it's always more, hey, I have an idea. What do you think about this? Or this may not be true, but try this on. Let me know what you think about this. Or I might even say, this may be projection. I might just be throwing this at you, right? But so just if you think it's about me, just tell me, it's fine, right? So what I'm doing is I'm sharing my confusion or my lack of certainty or whatever it is, my curiosity, and trying to create my client or put them in the role of a collaborator, throwing stuff out there and let's bounce this back and forth and see. And I think what that does is it creates a more, like I said, it's a more sort of unifying thing in the relationship, but I think it also decreases defensiveness against the interpretations. And again, these are all really basic fundamental things that when I talk to students who have been practicing for many years, they go, oh, that's a great idea. I never thought of that. Right. So maybe the truth of the matter is, and I hear that because I'm a big sports fan. So I always hear that, athletes, golfers, football, baseball players, they go through good times and bad times. And when they go through bad times, when their games are off, what they always generally say is we got to return to the fundamentals, right? So I think probably the fundamentals are that's also true for therapists. And I think maybe we'd all need to be reminded of those things every few years, just to put them back in our brain and not get so sort of off track with all the specific theories and ideas we might have about things.
Absolutely. But as you're talking, Lou, I think the fundamentals are, to me, they sound deeply respectful to kind of to the people we are, to people we're with. And, the idea of, presenting something to clients, and I know you didn't use the word, but I'm sure you do as well, around, even asking clients the permission, can I actually present something to you, but presenting it then in a way that allows them to reject it, I think is very, very respectful.
Sure, absolutely. So another concept that I use, and it's related to the importance of our ignorance, our curiosity, our humility, is this idea of a good enough therapist, which I kind of steal from Winnicott when he talked about being a good enough parent, right? Being a good enough therapist isn't about not making mistakes or being perfect, right? Being a good enough therapist is kind of like being a parent that can be a secure attachment figure. You show up most of the time, and the majority of the time you're able to be present and attuned and all of that. And that's what it takes in a relationship. So I think that it's important for us to be mindful and careful about doing the best work we can, and also to if we feel like we're making mistakes, damn it, that's our job to work on those things. But on the other hand, it's helpful to realize that mistakes are inevitable, and that if you're going to make a mistake, it's really important to make a good mistake, right? So I also like to to talk about that notion of how to make good mistakes.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, before I go into that, Liam, are there questions or any other things that we want to address?
Well, there's just a few things. Just before you go into that, Lou, I'd like to say that the webinar series, for people that don't know, is on in February. So it's the 4 Saturdays in February, and it'll be on 4 to 7, which is Irish Standard Time. And if anybody is interested in signing up, Mary, you might put the link into the chat, please. And I think there's one question after coming in. It's from Kerry. And the question is, I would like to hear your view on power in the therapeutic relationship.
Okay, that's thinking about power. I would imagine, just to sort of try to figure out what that question means. If you're talking about sort of status or authority, I think it sort of goes directly, I think, to what we've been talking about. There is this sense of collaboration. I mean, you are, as the therapist, you are in a position of being responsible for guiding it, directing it, and all of that. But I think, on the other hand, it's important to know, or perhaps to look at both the transference and the counter transference about power, right?
Mm.
In other words, how does the client experience you? If you take into account issues of economic status, race, gender, culture, all of those things. I like to have very explicit conversations with clients about those things, especially at least in where I am. If I'm working with ethnic minorities, say with Hispanic Americans or African Americans, and whoever I'm working with, really of different races and genders, and like, what are those power dynamics? How do they manifest? How do they, because I'm an old white guy, and I grew up with a grandfather who was born in 1910, and a lot of the old attitudes, the Italian attitudes that he had, are inside of me, even though I might be, I may think of myself as more modern or more evolved, but I'm always finding ways at which I have hidden biases and perceptions and all of those things. And it's wonderful to be able to put those things on the table and be able to talk about those things with a client and get them out of the way. It's a way for me to learn, and it's also a way for them to learn about my commitment to trying to see past those things. Unconscious biases are unconscious. That's kind of by definition. But I think that we can certainly talk about those things and see if we can work through them, and perhaps even if we can. Maybe there are some clients that it would be better if they saw another therapist who was of a different gender or race or age or whatever that is. Okay. Of course, if you're looking at me, I get a lot of grandpa transfers, right? And so while I love being a grandpa, not everybody has completely positive projections onto grandpas. And so we have to explore those things. So, in those situations, I try to be the grandpa they wanted as opposed to the grandpa they had, say. But I think it really is, it's a work in progress. There's probably always some power differential. I have clients that come in who are very wealthy and very famous and all of that stuff, and they throw their money around and they drop names, they do all of those things. And that power differential really creates a problem for their healing. Plus, I have to deal with my countertransference of working my butt off, and somebody who goes into work a few hours a week is making 10 times the money that I have, right? And so they go in all directions and in all kinds of ways. But I guess the thing is to stay open to it, to talk to colleagues, to try to tape your sessions, play them for colleagues that you respect and are well trained, because they're going to hear things that you don't hear. And I say this to my students all the time, especially the ones that are going into their first sessions, right? I say, listen, I know you don't know what you're doing, but you have an advantage over your client, and the advantage is you're not them. And what that means is that you can hear what they're telling you from a different perspective. And so you have, just in that, you have value. And also you have value in being able to listen and be attentive, right? Those things don't require a lot of training. They take more of a commitment, and they require an attitude. And so I try to send my students through their first session with that sort of humble, open curiosity, and having a little bit of confidence that they'll be able to see something that will be helpful eventually to their clients.
Yeah, and it probably takes a while before people see the real kind of power and benefit of curiosity. We have another few questions. Will I call them out, Philo?
Absolutely.
So the first is from Bridget. Do you have any recommendations for reading or other preparation work that would benefit doing beforehand? I presume before the course in February.
Yeah, well, the books I'll be using are two of The Making of a Therapist, which is a book that I wrote that really is a book from the course I described that I've been teaching for a long time. And then there's a follow-up book called The Development of a Therapist, and that has more specific topics. There's some neuroscience there. There's, more higher level discussion. So I would say start out with the making of a therapist. And if you want to read that other book as well, but that's something that will come a little later.
Okay, great. And Kerry says your answer is empowering. Okay, so the other question is for Mary. It's around C credits. Okay, and we have another question. I had so much training and own therapy that getting serious about building my practice is becoming increasingly difficult because all I can see are the skills I don't have yet. Any advice?
Well, I can relate. I remember I had been training. I had 4,000 or 5,000 hours of supervised therapy work. I had 2 full years of internship, practicum experiences, you name it. And I remember the day I found myself in my office. They delivered the furniture, and I was sitting in my office, and I was in my own practice for the first time. And I thought, holy mackerel, I don't have any clue what I'm doing. And I started having fantasies that I was going to call my father and see if he'd let me back into the construction business. So this is scary as hell. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And so, I think that if you've done everything you're supposed to do as far as education and licensing and all of those things, now it's that leap of faith to go in, to put yourself in the situation. We have to tolerate the anxiety of making errors, of not being perfect. I mean, one of my supervisees said, he says he's been practicing for years. He says, I keep waiting for a grown-up to show up at my office and tell me that tell my client I've been, making believe I'm a therapist and that I need to go home.
Yeah.
Right. So I think as kids, we keep waiting for the grown-ups to show up. And then we grow up and we're still waiting for the grown-ups to show up. And it's hard to realize that now we're the grown-ups. So I guess I would say that, not that this is any comfort, but now you're a grown-up. So here's what, the situation is to really hunker down, take case by case, get good supervision on those cases, and make sure. This is what I do with my one-on-one supervisees. And so we just go from case to case to case. We theorize about what's going on. We try different things. They play tapes for me. And slowly it's an apprentice model, right? You keep doing it under the watchful eye of someone who you think knows more than you do. And you just see eventually you're you're going down separate lanes, but slowly as the weeks go by, you get more and more in line. And I love that experience with students where eventually they show me a tape and they talk about the case and I go, good. There's nothing, I have nothing to say. I get it, And again, and then when they're done with me, a good thing to do is go on to another supervisor, because I'm only seeing things how I see them. I can only offer my perspective and things based on my training. There's no one right way to do therapy. There's lots of ways. And the more good people you work with, the more you'll be able to develop your skills. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that part of the fantasy is you graduate and you get a degree, so you should know what you're doing. Right. And that obviously not the case. The better model is in martial arts. You work for 5 years or so and you finally earn a black belt. And then what your sensei tells you is, okay, now you're ready to start learning. That's a lot what this is like as well.
Very good. There's a few comments after coming in, Lou, about your background. And Mary said, is that the view outside your window or a picture? It's lovely.
Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could afford to live in a house that would have this kind of view? No, I'm just sitting on the floor in front of a black sofa in my library. That's this is my imagination. This is somewhere in Bali. But I've heard also people from Northern California say that it looks very much like the view from their window. So probably less exotic.
Super. And Mary says, curiosity and wandering aloud. respectfully with a client is a wonderful tool in the therapeutic relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. You said something before, Liam. You said that I remember. It's like, how many people growing up have been curious about who you are, right? As opposed, we have plenty of people growing up who tell us who we should be and how we should behave and what we should feel and not feel. But when I ask that question to my students, it's very often you'll see they'll squint for a few seconds and then their faces light up, right? And they go, yeah, I had an uncle, or that was my older brother, or that was, an aunt or something like that. And I say, well, okay, anyone else? And they go, no, I can't think of anybody. So for the most part, I've found that if someone can think of something, usually the most people they think of is two. So what that means, what that suggests, I think, to me, is that being listened to, having someone sitting across from you who's curious and caring, is not a common experience. Absolutely. And so creating that is a it's a wonderful way to be in the world.
Yeah, I think so, Lou. I think it's about being curious about how our people are organized, rather than trying to regulate them or trying to change them. And even I didn't kind of really appreciate Carl Rogers' work until kind of later years. Even this idea of reflecting back, or to our people in their own language, and even reflecting back something that's just kind of peeping out. I learned these interventions in college, but in college, I certainly didn't see the kind of power in that. I wanted something bigger and better. Just reflecting back is not powerful, or being curious is not powerful, or just being interested in, how your world is organized inside without actually trying to change the organization. These are, for me, the most powerful interventions.
Yeah. I had the same reaction initially, because I think, and in retrospect, it just looks like my own ego and grandiosity. It's like I wanted to say something or do something where a client would look at me and sort of like, fall to their knees and go, "Oh my God, you've saved my life," right? There's sort of a messianic impulse. And Rogers was all, you would never, if Rogers was in a crowd and you didn't know who he was, he would not stand out to you. He was a very humble, he was more like a Buddhist monk than he was, sort of a celebrity therapist. And I think that in the therapy room, it's important for us to work on getting our ego as small as possible and allowing our clients to fill up as much of the space as possible. Not always true, but I think most often that's the case.
Yeah, and I think just even using clients' language can really help with that. Because for me, wanting to kind of impress, we use kind of big words and kind of fancy language. And okay, Lou. So unfortunately, we're coming to the end. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap it up? Or have you said everything you wanted to say?
I think so. Yeah. I guess I guess to wrap it up, I would just say I'm looking forward to doing these trainings in February. I'm hoping that what I've said interests some of you enough to where you want to join. And I'd love to be engaged with as many of you as possible to learn about each other, to develop our knowledge and skills and abilities, and stop or feel less like imposters.
Great. Okay, and just to say, we're going to have another free webinar on the 17th of November, and I'll have to talk to you about the format of that, Lou. But I'm looking forward to that as well. And then we're back in February, every Saturday in February, so it's really something to look forward to in the new year. So, Lou, thanks for joining us. Really kind of appreciate you taking the time
Pleasure.
In your busy schedule, and a big thank you to Mary and Robert who kept the show on the road. The next time now we'll get them to keep the cameras on, and we'll get them involved.
Robert has to have his hair done next time.
Yeah, Yeah, he has to do something with the hair. It's getting too long. So until then, we see you, Lou. Have a good
Yeah.
rest of the day.
Bye.
Take
Be
care.
well.
Bye.
Be well, everyone.